Hi everybody. So here is the video that I said I was going to put up on the disciples. Jesus' disciples, and some were apostles. So here's the thing. We don't need a big long list of 70 some people who were called, okay? Because we already know that. No, actually, I have a different point to make. It has nothing to do with the actual number that were called by Jesus, as it has to do with who the original 12 were and what Paul's place is in all of this. Okay? So, in Matthew chapter 10, we read that these following people were called to be disciples: Matthew, John, Judas, James, Peter, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, Thaddeus, Simon, and the other James. Okay? So, here's the thing. That leaves out Mark, Luke, and Paul, right? Mark, Luke, and Paul, because they come around much later, correct? So, the point that I want to make is this. Those who are out there on their YouTube channels trying to say that Paul was never a disciple, they're correct. Paul was not a disciple. Paul was what was called an apostle, okay? And he came around much later. And as well as Luke, and as well as Mark, okay? Now, Mark and Luke are obviously not debated. It's always Paul that people seem to have an issue with. Okay? People say because Paul said that he had an experience on the road to Damascus. Because Paul said that Jesus called him, that we cannot possibly take his word for it because there are simply no witnesses. Even though Mark and Luke defend Paul's story, okay, nobody was there, okay, and it's the same thing as in with the Holocaust, okay. Think of it this way: there are many people, believe it or not, who will say to this day that the Holocaust never happened, okay, and their argument is that they were not there, and we're taking people's word for it. Now, 2,000 years ago, we do not have pictures of people from 2,000 years ago. However, we do have pictures of the Holocaust, correct? So, we do have pictures of the Holocaust, but that's like saying that the Holocaust never happened. I mean, okay, so take Paul, for instance. Paul was the one who said he had an experience, right? But he was the only one present. Well, it's the same thing with a Jew from out of the Holocaust. They were the surviving Jews that came out of the Holocaust. They can say that they had an experience, but you weren't them, and you weren't the one that had the experience, right? So you just have to take their word for it. Now, of course, we have plenty of documentation that the Holocaust, in fact, did happen. Okay, but I'm just using this as an example, okay? So, do you get where I'm going with this? So, Paul says he had an experience, but if we weren't there, it's true, we cannot prove that he really did have an experience. Okay, however, even though Paul was not an original disciple, okay, and there were only 12, right? Paul was not included. Even though he was not called by God to be one of the original 12, it does not mean that God did not call him later, okay, to be an apostle. I mean, I can tell you that I'm a prophetess, but you don't have any proof of that, right? You have absolutely no proof but my word of mouth. Just like with Paul, you have no proof that he was called by God except for through his own word of mouth, correct? It's the same thing, right? However, we know for fact that people were called to different things. So it's not a question of whether or not you believe that I have been called as a prophetess. That is up to each individual person to believe or not to believe. The fact is that God does call people to certain things. Okay, he does say that he does give prophetic giftings to certain people. And that's up to you whether you want to believe that person or not. And it's that person's own word of mouth that will be judged on Judgment Day. It's not you being judged, it's them being judged. So let that person worry about it. Okay, but back to the issue of Paul. So Paul says he had an experience, okay, that Luke and Mark back up, okay? However, when we consider the fact that Paul has actual good works to show for himself and good fruit that comes from Paul, and the fact that Paul stopped persecuting the Christians says leaps and bounds about him. So something must have happened to him, or else he would not have the good works to show for himself, the good fruit to show for himself. I mean, we read of accounts in the scriptures of where Paul went, what he did, who he talked to, what happened. People have been brought to the faith. So just like Mark and Luke, you know. So if someone is producing good fruit and they have good works to show for themselves, then more than likely they're telling the truth, right? Now, if you Google search who was Paul, it'll tell you that he was an apostle. And I know many people will say, well, don't believe Google, you know. But, you know, that's like saying you're going to throw out all the history books. That's like saying that World War I and World War II didn't happen because you weren't there. You know, I mean, it's the same thing. So, Paul was actually his Greek name. He was known by his Greek name, Paul. His Hebrew name was Shaul, okay? And it was always Shaul. And he was known by Paul when he, you know, reached out to more Greeks, okay? And he was known by both names. So, Paul, Saul, Shaul, okay, whoever you want to call him, he was an apostle called by God who did have that experience on the way to Damascus. Because we can take that as the truth because he stopped persecuting the Christians and he has good works and good fruit to show for himself and his ministry. Okay? And those who say that he did not line up with Yeshua or the Torah, that is false. And I have provided many videos showing where Paul, Shaul, and Yeshua agreed together on that we should still keep the Torah. It's just that we have the blood atonement now to forgive us when we mess up. So I've been very clear about that. And so I want to put this Paul argument to rest. I still have to go over that scripture in Timothy for that one individual. And I said I would make a video about that, and I'm going to make that next. That's going to be the next video I put up. So get ready for that one. But I want to put this whole thing with Shaul to bed. If there are people out there on their YouTube channels trying to tell you that Shaul is not a true apostle of God, called by God, who didn't really have an experience, they're false. Don't listen to them. Because Paul's good works and good fruit speak for themselves, okay? And he has these guys, Mark and Luke, to back him up. All right? So let's put this to bed once and for all. And by the way, Judas was eventually replaced with Matthias, okay? So there were originally 12, okay? And I named them all off. All right, so that's Matthew, John, Judas, replaced by Matthias. Matthias, I'm sorry. James, Peter, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, James, Thaddeus, and Simon. And this is the thing, you know, there were many called after that. Up to 70. You know, there were many called after that. But the point is that while it's true that Paul was not a part of the original 12, okay, he was called by God, and he was an apostle. Yes, this is according to what he said, and yes, this is according to what he said he experienced. However, I think that his life spoke for itself, okay? He had good works, he had good fruit, and he stopped persecuting the Christians. And so we can pretty much say, why would he lie? Why would he lie? So that's all I have to say about that. I'm not going to be discussing this Paul stuff again, this Shaul stuff again. I'm finished with this. I do believe that Shaul was a true apostle. His writings were included in the canon of the Bible. We should take them and run with them. Okay? And that's all I have to say about that. Please watch the videos by Triumph and Truth. Did Paul and Yeshua agree? Watch as many of those videos as you can. There's several videos about Paul and Yeshua, about Shaul and Yeshua. Check those out. And like I said, I will get up this last video about the verse in Timothy, and that's going to be it for me. I'm not going to be discussing this anymore. I mark and avoid these people who try to say that Shaul was a liar and that he wasn't a true apostle. I just mark and avoid those people, and I would suggest you do too. Talk to y'all later.